Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Around the Table with the AOTR. I'm Marie Johnson. Tonight's episode is heavy, but my heart is light for one reason. My sister and co host, Beverly Anderson, is back at the table. Bev, you've been through a grueling surgery and you're staring down a cancer diagnosis with the kind of grace that most people can't imagine. How are you feeling sitting back in that chair?
Well, Sai, honestly, I'm pretty prepared and, I've got a lot on my plate still, but I love to make time for this. And being away from here just really made me realize how much all these conversations matter. And just, I've been in a few hospital beds watching everything go sideways and tilt. And I couldn't wait to get back of it to make sense of it with you. The prayers and messages from our AOTR family, they're fuel in my tank right now.
I'm glad to hear that. So, we're going to keep that tank full. To everyone listening, Bev is a fighter, but medical bills in 2026 are no joke. I'm going to be pinning the link to her GoFundMe in the show description notes. So please go ahead and follow her journey, donate if you can, and let's show the world what this community does for its own. We are not going to let her fight this by herself. And again, you can find the link in the show notes.
Thank you so much, Sai. I love you for that. And it is time to get to work. We have a crisis 90 miles south that is reaching a fever pitch.
So let's set the stage. Since the start of 2026, the United States has tightened the screws on Cuba to a degree that we haven't seen in decades. It's no longer just an embargo, it's an energy blockade. Bev, what is the total pressure policy actually doing to the grid?
It's a systematic strangulation, Sai, by targeting the shipping insurance companies and the tankers coming out of the revamped Venezuelan ports. The U.S. has effectively cut off 90% of Cuba's diesel and crude imports. As of this morning, Havana is on a rotation alpha schedule, meaning residents only get 4 hours of electricity a day. The rest of the island, they are in total darkness.
And it's February. People think tropical, but without refrigeration, food is rotting in the heat. We're seeing reports of olla de presión, which is pressure cooker, and protests in the streets because people can't even cook the meager rations of rice that they have. The United States stance is that this will force the government to flip, but historically, does that ever really happen?
History says no. Usually the elites keep their lights on while the most vulnerable, the elderly and the sick, suffer. It's a humanitarian gamble with millions of lives as the chips.
This brings us to the breaking news from today, February 25th, a tragedy off the coast of Villa Clara, a high-speed chase that ended in gunfire and 4 lives lost. What are the confirmed details?
Around a.m., a U.S. registered Go Fast boat was intercepted by the Cuban border guard. This wasn't just a standard stop. The Cuban Interior Ministry claims the boat was part of a human smuggling operation fueled by the desperation of the blackouts. Shots were exchanged. 4 people on that boat are dead. 2 are Cuban nationals, and 2 are reported to be Florida residents.
The rhetoric is already flying. Some are calling it a massacre by the Cuban state, while Havana is calling it a provocation by Florida-based groups trying to destabilize the island during the fuel crisis. It feels like 1996 all over again, the Brothers to the Rescue era, where one spark on the water could lead to a full military escalation.
Exactly, and that's the danger right now. When you starve a country of energy, you create a vacuum of desperation. People will take to the sea, and those who want to see a conflict will find an excuse to start one.
So we have to talk about the United States' involvement here. The administration is holding firm, saying they won't lift the fuel sanctions until democratic concessions are made. Isn't that a joke right now? But even our allies in the EU and Canada are beginning to distance themselves from this. They're calling it unconscionable given the medical shortages.
Of course, yeah, that's exactly right. When the UN General Assembly voted last fall, it was nearly unanimous against the blockade. But in 2026, with the current geopolitical climate, the U.S. is using Cuba as a chess piece to signal strength to other adversaries. The problem is you can't eat strength and you can't run a ventilator on signals.
And let's be clear, as we've recorded in our standing records, we aren't here to shy away from the hard truths or withdraw any complaints about how this is being handled. The policy is failing the people it claims to want to liberate. Period. We've talked about Havana, but the rebels are hitting the entire Caribbean basin. CARICOM, the Caribbean community that is, issued a blistering statement this morning. They aren't just worried about Cuba, they're worried about themselves. Bev, how does a blackout in Cuba destabilize a neighbor like Jamaica or the Bahamas?
Well, that's an interesting question that I think is really important here. It's the migration pressure valve sigh. When life becomes unlivable, people move. We're already seeing a 300% increase in maritime interceptions by the U.S. Coast Guard this month alone. If the Cuban electrical grid suffers a total system collapse, which engineers are warning is imminent, you're looking at a mass exodus that the regional security forces simply cannot handle.
And it's not just migration, it's trade. Cuba has been a hub for medical exports and disaster response in the Caribbean for decades. With their labs dark and their planes grounded for lack of fuel, that puts the entire region's safety net in a position of fraying.
There's another layer to this fuel crisis that people forget: the internet. No power means no routers, no cell towers, and no way for the Cuban people to tell their own stories. We're seeing a digital dark age descending over the island.
And that vacuum is being filled by propaganda from both sides. While the Cuban government blames every single broken light bulb on the United States blockade, social media bots from outside are flooding the few available networks with calls for a violent uprising. And I just want to say that's absolutely not what we need. It's a dangerous game of telephone where the truth is the first casualty. Please do not be a person who adds to that.
Very true, and that's just the facts of the matter. When people can't check in on their families in the next province because the towers are down, fear takes over. That fear is what leads to the kind of desperation we saw with that speedboat tragedy today. Information is just as vital as fuel, and right now the Cuban people have neither.
I want to get granular for a moment because this hits close to home for us, Bev. You're recovering from surgery. You know how vital a stable environment is. Imagine that a hospital is losing power in the middle of you having a procedure.
It's one of those nightmares that I just can't stop thinking about because, a 4-hour surgery that I had, 2 hours in, if the lights had gone out, who knows what would have happened because it was robotic assisted surgery. So, right now, we have reports from the Calixto Garcia Hospital in Havana that describe surgeons as finishing operations by the light of cell phones. The dialysis machines are failing. Insulin is spoiling because the cold chain has been broken for 72 hours. We are talking about state sanctioned mortality here.
And we have to look at how this fits into the broader, darker picture of the Trump regime's behavior across Latin America. We can't talk about Cuba without mentioning the absolute chaos in Mexico right now. The administration's border security rhetoric is a smokescreen for the fact that we've seen a surge in U.S. sourced high grade weaponry flowing directly into the hands of the very cartels that we are claiming to fight. They are credible reports that we've essentially supplied arms for the Jalisco New Generation cartel as misguided stabilization tactic that has backfired into total civil unrest.
Definitely, it is all connected, Sai. While we are at Mexico and Cuba, look at Venezuela. We haven't discussed Nicolas Maduro in months. It's like he's been erased from the news cycle, but his silence is a result of the same scorched earth diplomacy. The regime is squeezing every neighbor into a corner, whether it's arming cartels in Mexico or starving the grid in Cuba. The goal isn't democracy. It's total chaotic control. It's a pattern of destabilization that treats the entire hemisphere like a chessboard where the pawns are human lives.
We also have to look at who is stepping into the void. As the U.S. pulls the tourniquet tighter, Russia and China are smelling opportunity. There are rumors of a fuel for bases deal being discussed in Moscow as we speak.
And that is a terrifying prospect. If the U.S. pushes Cuba into a corner where their only choice is starvation or becoming a permanent military outpost of a foreign adversary, we're just recreating the 1962 missile crisis for the TikTok generation. It's a massive strategic failure masquerading as toughness.
Right? And by refusing to allow even humanitarian fuel shipments and simultaneously fueling cartel violence in Mexico, the U.S. is handing the keys of the Caribbean and Latin America to our greatest rivals. It's a short sighted way to get what they want, and it's dangerous. As we saw today with the 4 lives that were lost on that boat, it is literally already costing blood. Bev, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, from the dark streets of Havana to the cartel unrest of Mexico, and back to your own brave fight here at home. It's a lot for our listeners to take in.
It is, but we just can't look away right now. That's so important. Whether it's countries struggling to keep the lights on or an individual struggling with a diagnosis, the solution is the same: community. advocacy, and refusing to be silenced.
Amen to that. I just want to amplify one statement right now coming off of that. Please rise up to elevate to the highest frequency of love right now. That is the only way we will get through what we are dealing with as a global, entire network of humanity. We will not get through if you do not choose to elevate to that higher frequency of love. And this is the hour that you must decide because they're coming across the board for everyone that they can get their hands on. And if you're not willing to stand up and elevate to that highest frequency, you will be snuffed out. It's not a question. And I hate to say that because I know how scary it is. But again, this is around the table with the AOTR, and that is what we do here. So, again, everyone, please check the link for Beverly's GoFundMe. She's back at the table because she's a warrior, but warriors need an army behind them. So help us keep her journey and her voice loud and clear as we continue to call out on these regime behaviors. We've been here for a year now doing it, and we're going to keep doing it. Follow her journey, donate, and share the episode because people need to know the truth about what's happening in our backyard.
Thank you for having my back, Si. I really appreciate it. And it just goes to show that, as I said, community is one of the biggest parts of success, even when you're facing something as horrible to deal with as cancer. But just like those things that we have to keep up and that higher frequency we've got to reach, I want to thank everybody for listening to us and considering our words. We'll keep the seat warm for you.
I love that. Everybody stay informed, stay compassionate, and remember, we don't withdraw our complaints ever. We have a lot of work to get done, and it needs to be documented because history needs to be known, even if it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. This is Around the Table with the AOTR. We'll see you next time.